You're watching Euronews Tonight. I'm Rome Zadi and these are the headlines at this hour. After Thursday's euphoria, it was a bump back to planet Earth as EU leaders tackled the cost of living crisis, soaring inflation, energy and food security on the final day of the EU summit. The US Supreme Court overturns the landmark judgment Roe versus Wade, meaning US states can ban abortions. A blow for Ukraine. Troops are forced to retreat from the besieged eastern city of Severodonetsk to avoid being encircled by advancing Russian forces.
Here in the Cube, we'll take a closer look at a misleading Russian TV report that states that thousands in Belgium do not support Ukraine.
Good evening. EU leaders reconvened in Brussels today to discuss energy and economy as the continent grapples with soaring inflation and a cost of living crisis. After the celebrations over Ukraine's candidate status on Thursday, heads of states faced tougher talks on the summit's second day. Discussions centred on cutting dependence on Russian fossil fuels with a focus on alternative energy sources. Brussels has accused Moscow of weaponising energy as Russia tightens its squeeze on gas supplies to EU countries. In a joint press conference after the summit, EU chiefs stressed that plans are in place to deal with further energy disruptions. Well, for more, let's now cross over to Brussels and to our correspondent, Shona Murray. Shona, good to see you there. So after yesterday's absolute euphoria, it was definitely a bump back to earth as EU leaders, of course, discussed gas, energy, cost of living. The list was endless. Take us through it.
That's right, Mariam. It was a fair amount of political euphoria yesterday and sort of moving into today when the EU was able to make that historic decision to give candidate status to Ukraine, to Moldova, to potentially Georgia. We also had some positive news coming from Bulgaria, which could unblock the way for North Macedonia and Albania. So very much hope in the air in relation to the future of the EU. But then, as you said today, much more sobering discussions about the future in relation to this war in that Russia is imposing on Ukraine and the impact that's having on the EU, in particular for energy. We have around 12 EU member states that have either been fully or partially cut off from Russian gas. We know the impact the sanctions are having on the price of oil. So there's a really very difficult winter ahead. Take a listen to President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, making that point after the summit this afternoon.
Not be a return to cheap fossil fuels, I think, and therefore, alongside temporary and targeted support to vulnerable families and businesses, it is essential to help our economies and societies to adapt to the new conditions. The root cause of our problem is our dependence on fossil fuel, which we must get rid of.
That's EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, making the point that what needs to happen is targeted temporary measures to deal with the pressures putting on businesses, families, economies in relation to the rising cost of inflation, rising inflation and rising cost of energy. But she also making the point that we can't return to cheap fossil fuels. So the two things have to happen at the same time. The issue is, Mariam, there is no solution that treats all 27 member states. Now, the Commission said they will respond by around September with some proposals on the table. But there's a fear that that might be too late. Mariam?
Definitely difficult times. Shona, thanks for being across this jam-packed EU summit. Thanks so much. Well, we're now joined from Kyiv by Olga Stefanishina. She's the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine for European integration. Ms. Stefanishina, thanks for joining us on the programme tonight. So this has been a monumental and historical decision for Ukraine. And it perhaps goes beyond just symbolism by the EU. It's perhaps a real recognition, would you say, of the value that your country can bring to the EU?
Yes, indeed. The first congratulation we were sending following this decision was the congratulation to EU itself and all 27 leaders. This decision has brought really back EU on the global arena and the global agenda. It is set to recognize by that basically the full-scale war started on 24th of February. It took a while, but we see that the leadership of global democracy is back on track. whether it comes on sanctions or taking the geopolitical steps. In Ukraine, it's, of course, a historical decision. It's the end of the very first demand of Ukrainian people to be part of the European family. We're coming back to where we belong. And this is the first legal solution taken in that regard in 30 years of our independence.
So coming back to where you belong, but, you know, as you're very well aware of, the path to membership itself is very long and very hard, and you're also fighting this war. How long do you think it's going to take for Ukraine to meet those obligations for membership?
As I was saying, we had a long way to go before this decision has taken place, before we submitted the application for membership on the 5th day of war. By that time, we already have 70% of legal compliance with the EU legislation, and we have proven to have a fully operational and capable governance in peaceful time, but also in time of a war. So we would definitely not be lacking capacity, and all the world knows that we are not lacking the persistence and dedication. So, of course, it should take some time because we need to rebuild our country, we need to restore our economy, we need to end the war and win this war. But as soon as the window of opportunity for Ukraine to become a compatible and strong member of EU will take place, we will be definitely ready for that.
Indeed. And, you know, coming to the war itself, we're now into 4 months. You've had many wins, some losses. Does this decision by the EU perhaps renew your faith and resolve to keep going now?
Yes, indeed, this was a very inspiring moment to our people, 91% of which really support and understands how much this decision is important. Of course, this decision will not have immediate effect to end the war or to bring us to the ending of this war, but the history of this decision will have a multiplication effect, and this is an extremely inspiring moment for people, for armed services, for those who have been standing on the revolution of dignity for European future. And this is the first victory we gain by fighting for our freedom, for our democracy, for our values. This is the fight. We're joined now with the political will of 27 members, and our people know that. You know that over these 4 years, we have different statements and different positions from different leaders, like Germany, like Netherlands. Sometimes there was like very misguiding states from France. But this has ended yesterday. We have the full unity over making Ukraine back to the family, and that makes us understand that it is related to going with us until the very last moment when we win in this war and become the member of European Union.
It was indeed a sign of unity. Olga Stefanishyna, Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine for European Integration. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, Roe versus Wade, the US Supreme Court decision which underpins the constitutional right to abortion in America has been overturned. The court's justices voted 6-3 against the right, with all 3 of the justices appointed by former President Donald Trump voting to strike down abortion. It will now be an issue decided by individual states, with about half expected to ban or severely restrict the procedure. Now, earlier, the Speaker of the House of US Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, said abortion will now be a key issue in upcoming congressional elections.
While Republicans seek to punish and control women, Democrats will keep fighting ferociously to enshrine Roe v. Wade into the law of the land. This cruel ruling is outrageous and heart-wrenching, but make no mistake, again, it's all on the ballot in November.
Well, let's now get more from Colin Campbell, who joins us from Washington, D.C. Colin, good to see you. So this is a stunning, absolutely stunning decision by the US Supreme Court. Take us through what's happened.
Yeah, really, this is really stunning, Miriam, because this overrules and overturns a 50-year precedent that was established in 1973 with Roe versus Wade. And of course, this leaves a lot of women's pregnancy rights and abortion rights in question, where you already have 13 states that will enact trigger laws within the month that could really change the way that women seek out abortions and the way they receive health care. Of course, this also puts in flux the rest of the nation, which will try to deal with how it deals with pregnancy and abortion rights individually. So this is really going to change the landscape in the way that women address their health care, their abortion rights, and the way that the rest of the land is governed when it comes to pro-life and pro-choice debates.
Well, let's pick up on what you're saying there about, the rights of women. Stats say that 1 in 4 women in the US will seek an abortion in their lifetime. So what is this then going to mean, if you could elaborate? Are we going to perhaps see, unfortunately, an uptick in unsafe abortions?
Yeah, it's said that about a quarter of all women will receive an abortion before the age of 45. So this is really going to affect a lot of women nationwide, as there are already studies as late as last year, a study coming out of the University of Colorado in Boulder saying that there will be an uptick of about 21% of women that will be affected by seeking an abortion that may not be done by a medical facility. And this number could increase 33% for Black American women. So we see already there is a disparate amount of people that will be impacted by this law in America. The CDC also says that there are indications that this could show an uptick, and this could result in an uptick in women seeking illegal abortions as well. And then, of course, we have the laws of what happens when someone does have an abortion that is not legally sanctioned. This could result in years in prison, by up to 5 to 15 years. This would be considered a Class B felony, meaning that this would mean prison time for women who are convicted of receiving an illegal abortion.
A Class B felony. So what's the reaction then been across the political divide? I mean, this is, of course, a huge victory for Conservatives, but what have leading Democrats been saying about this?
Yeah, of course, Democrats are definitely outraged, and they're looking to take this as a political action and, of course, a talking point, and then for people to get activated come this November for midterm elections. They want people to respond to the Supreme Court decision at the polls, to vote in people who would definitely be more favorable and more open to the issue of women's health care. So, of course, we already heard House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking about this. We are expecting the President of the United States, Joe Biden, to make a statement about the Supreme Court decision, but this will definitely be a big decision in November when people head out to vote.
It will indeed. Colin Campbell, thank you for reporting on that story for Euronews from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. OK, well, we'll take a short break here, but stay with us. There's lots more to come on Euronews tonight, including, well, he might be all the way in Rwanda, but UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is back in the hot seat. Can he hang on? Find out after the break. Welcome back to the programme. Now, the last Ukrainian forces in the embattled city of Severodonetsk have been ordered to withdraw. This comes as Russian forces inch closer to capturing the neighbouring city of Lysychansk, sparking fears of encirclement. Regional authorities announced this morning that troops in Severodonetsk must fall back to avoid further casualties. They added that 90% of homes had been destroyed by Russian shelling. Around 12,000 civilians are reported to be holed up in the city, but the destruction of 3 key bridges has thwarted evacuation efforts. With up to 20 million tons of grain remaining stuck inside war-torn Ukraine, there are fears the world is facing a hunger crisis. That's the message coming from Germany, which is hosting a key G7 summit in Bavaria. But how will leaders respond to the growing catastrophe? Daniel Bellamy has this report.
The world's facing a hunger crisis. That's the message coming from Germany, which is hosting a key G7 summit this weekend. Around 20 million tons of grain remain stuck inside Ukraine, and food prices have risen sharply. The G7 knows what the problem is. The question's whether they'll commit to feeding the hungriest people on the planet.
It is a hunger crisis that is looming before us like a life-threatening wave. Some of the reasons are not new. Regional conflicts, especially in Afghanistan, Taliban rule, droughts, the consequences of the climate crisis, and also the aftermath of COVID-19. But it was Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine that turned a wave into a tsunami.
The World Food Programme says a record 345 million people have been pushed into extreme hunger. Somalia is facing its worst drought in 40 years, and the WFP is now warning that without a massive injection of funding by donor countries, there'll be a famine.
Well, now we go to the UK, where British Prime Minister Boris Johnson faces more problems after the chairman of his party, Oliver Dowden, quit following 2 by-election defeats. In his resignation letter, he said, "We cannot carry on with business as usual." The Conservatives lost Tiverton and Honiton, one of their safe seats, to the Liberal Democrats, while in Wakefield, the main opposition Labour Party retook the seat that they had lost in 2019. It was the first electoral contest Johnson has faced since he narrowly survived a vote of confidence amongst his own MPs. But for more, let's now cross over to our UK reporter, Vincent McAviney. Vinny, good to see you. So this is a massive double body blow for the Conservatives, but perhaps the biggest part of this story is the scale of the Lib Dem victory. Take us through it.
It is a huge body blow for Boris Johnson, because normally by-elections are in large part down to local issues, but it really seems like this is being seen as a referendum on Boris Johnson's leadership. So as you say, the seat in the north, Wakefield, that was expected to go back to the Labour Party. The Labour Party only lost it at the 2019 general election. It was one of their so-called red wall heartlands that really flipped on a Brexit vote. So that very much expected, though if they hadn't got it back, huge problem for Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer, but that was safe. The big surprise of the night was the scale of the victory by the Liberal Democrats, traditionally the secondary opposition party here in the UK. They've suffered in recent years after that coalition with the Conservatives between 2010 and 2015, losing the vast majority of their MPs. But they managed to recapture that seat in the southwest, which is another battleground for the Conservatives, usually with the Lib Dems, on the seat that would really no one expected to go, because it has been Conservative for 99 years. Even in the huge Labour landslide of 97, it wasn't flipped. And this seat had a 25,000 majority. Now, there was potentially a local issue in play. The MP that had been sitting there had been caught in the House of Commons watching pornography on a number of times. So there was that scandal as well. But really, the scale of the victory, I don't think even the Lib Dems had dreamed of. And it shows that the Conservatives are now under threat from the 2 main opposition parties. Lots of MPs here in the UK very angry, very worried about their own seats. And the Lib Dems celebrated by unveiling in that seat a big door with the words, "Show Boris Johnson the door."
Well, let's come to that worry and concern that you talk about. Boris Johnson has said that he will listen to voters, but he's going to keep going. Can he, especially when you have the resignation of his chairman, Oliver Dowden, and also a former Tory leader, Michael Howard, is also now calling for him to go?
It's a very tricky time for Boris Johnson, particularly given his situation. He's currently in Rwanda, thousands of miles away, at a meeting of the Commonwealth heads of government. He's then going to the G7 in Germany, and then he goes to a NATO meeting in Spain. So he's effectively out of the country for at least the next 8 days, which could see a breaking in the ranks. We know that he survived that vote of confidence recently. That means there can't be another one for around a year. But Theresa May won a vote of confidence, but then had to resign within 6 months. We've seen Oliver Dowden, as you say, resign from the cabinet. At the moment, everyone else on the cabinet seems to be holding firm. They've put out messages in support. But on the backbenches, a lot of MPs are very worried, and we could start to see some manoeuvring, some trying and get behind potential candidates who could replace the Prime Minister. And that message as well from Michael Howard, who, don't forget, was the leader who actually sacked Boris Johnson Johnson the first time he got into a shadow cabinet for lying about an extramarital affair. So someone who has not liked Boris Johnson in the past, but saying very publicly now that he must go. So a really difficult situation for Boris Johnson. He probably wants to get back as soon as possible to try and firm up support, because in his absence, there could be maneuvers by people that want to try anything possible to get him out.
Thank you so much, Vincent McAvenny, for painting that picture, and definitely not a great time for Boris Johnson to be out of the country. Thanks so much, Vinny. OK, well, we'll take a short break here, but coming up, Sophia is in the Cube.
Did 80,000 people in Brussels really march against aid for Ukraine? We'll take a closer look after the break.
Welcome back to Euronews Tonight. Now, thousands of trade union workers have demonstrated in Brussels this week about the rising cost of living. But there are misleading claims that the protest was instead about Belgium's support for Ukraine. Sophia in the Cube has been taking a closer look. Sophia?
Yes, Miriam. Russia's main state TV channel aired this news report about the protest in Belgium.
Ну вот пока горячие головы соревнуются в милитаристской риторике, простые европейцы гадают, как спасти собственную...
The TV presenter introduces the subject by saying that over 80,000 people marched in the capital of Brussels, demanding that the country stop spending millions of euros on Ukraine and focus on its own people instead. So here in the Cube, we decided to fact-check these claims, and we found no evidence that support that these protests were spurred by anger against Belgium's stance on the Ukraine war. However, it is true that in certain videos like this one from this local state TV channel, we did see banners that criticize sanctions against Russia. And it's also true that Belgium has spent over 77 million euros on aid to Ukraine. But we found that the majority of the demands from the protesters and the unions did not mention Belgium's aid to Ukraine. Instead, the main reason for this protest, as you can see in this press release, was to change the country's law on wages. Basically, this law prevents wages from increasing by a certain percentage every year in order to not impact the profitability of Belgian businesses. But unions say that this is quite unfair due to the rising cost of living. And they also mention that certain companies have taken advantage of the war in Ukraine. So, Miriam, this protest of over 80,000 people was mainly about the rising cost of living and this wage law rather than the government's support for Kiev.
That was quite a bizarre story indeed. Thank you, Sophia. OK, well, that's it from myself and the team, but we'll leave you with a no comment from Menorca, where over 100 riders on horseback are delighting crowds in celebration of the iconic Saint-Jean festival. Thanks for watching Euronews Tonight.
Remember that the area near the music stage is the most dangerous. Please pay full attention. The next service.